As you watch the deep meaning images in this video, I'll walk you through deep motivational words up to the last minutes. Have you ever noticed how a room feels silent when the question isn't spoken out loud? Not the kind of silence where nothing is happening, but the kind where everything is. Where thought hover just below the surface, where we sit with a sense that something is in us is waiting, but we are not sure what we want yet. We don't name it. We don't rush to explain it. We just feel it settle in our chest, like a pause we didn't schedule. We are all here carrying something invisible, not heavy enough to corrupt us, not light enough to ignore. It moves with us through ordinary days. It shows up when we are brushed and brushing our teeth, when you are staring at a screen a little longer than necessary, when you are halfway through the conversation and realize we are not fully there. It's the weight of unfinished thought, unanswered questions we never asked because we didn't know how to phrase them without sounding dramatic, even to ourselves. It is strange how familiar this feels, like walking into what we have been in before, but can't remember why we come. The furniture hasn't changed, the light is the same, but something in the air suggests a conversation paused mid-sentence, as if everyone stepped out for a moment and never quite returned. We sit there anyway. We sit with it because living feels dishonest. We don't talk much about this part, not because it is rare, but because it is common. Common enough to feel unremarkable, common enough to believe it's just a background noise. But if we listen closely, there's a pattern in silence, a silent longing that doesn't ask for answers, it just asks for to be noticed. We are not to fix everything. Nothing is broken. There's no lesson waiting at the end of this thought. Just an observation, a shared between us, that often live in a space between what was and what hasn't arrived yet. And maybe that space isn't empty at all. Maybe it's simply a room we have been standing in together without realizing we were never alone. We don't usually call it doubt. That would make it sound louder than it is. It is more like a low-pressure system that follows us around. Subtle, familiar, easy to dismiss. It doesn't shout that we are doing something wrong. It just asks small questions at inconvenient times. Are we late? Are we early? Are we already behind something we never agreed to chase? We keep moving though. From the outside, it looks like progress. Days fill up, calendars cooperate, we answer messages, we show up. And yet there's this strange sensation of motion without distance, like walking on one of those airport conveyors that carries us forward while we are still standing still. We are technically moving, but something in us knows the ground isn't really changing. There's no single contradiction here. There are many. We want clarity, but we are afraid of what it might require. We want change, but we keep our routines close, like they are fragile objects. We tell ourselves we are being patient, when sometimes we are just waiting for certainty to arrive fast, and it never quite does. So we learn to live in the overlap. Have courage, have caution, have hope, have realism, not as failure of character, but as a shared human rhythm. Still using old maps, not because they are accurate, but because they are familiar. They worked once, or at least they helped us survive at a different landscape. But the terrain has shifted. What used to be solid feels less reliable now. What used to guide us feels slightly off, like a compass needle can't settle. We keep checking it anyway, wondering why the direction feels wrong even when the steps feels careful. The past has a way of triggering without asking permission. It shows up in the way we hesitate before speaking, in the way we overthink decisions that don't actually require that much weight, in the way certain moments replay themselves, not dramatically, just often enough to shape how we move. They're not memories we sit down with. They're memories that sit down with us. And somewhere in all of this, there's a certain tension we rarely name. The tension between who we were, who learned certain rules, adapted certain habits, and who we are becoming, whether we like it or not. We can feel the shift happening in real time, not all at all. Just enough to make us slightly uncomfortable in our own skin. Nothing here is alarming. Nothing here demands a solution. It's simply the weather. It is simply weather we are all standing in. And maybe the discomfort isn't a sign that something is wrong. Maybe it's just the atmosphere changing slowly, honestly, around us. You start to notice the patterns when no one is watching. Not in dramatic moments, but in the pause. In the way you hesitate before replying, even when you already know what you want to say. In a way your body reacts before your thoughts catch up. You don't remember choosing those habits. They just appear, preformed, like they have all belonged to you. There's a certain fear that comes with realization. Not panic, not dread, not dread. Just a steady awareness that if nothing interrupts this rhythm, it might repeat itself. Again, you tell yourself you are different now, more aware, more careful. And yet, the cycle feels familiar, comfortable, even. Like furniture you have learned to walk around in the dark. Your inner dialogue keeps running, even when the room is silent. It asks questions without expecting answers. Is this the right time? Is this enough? Am I moving towards something or just away from discomfort? You don't ask those questions out loud because they sound too exposed when spoken. Inside, though, they echo, softly, persistently. You revisit the same moment in your mind, not because you enjoy them, but because they feel unresolved. Like rereading the same chapter of book, hoping this time the ending will shift. You notice new details each time. A sentence you skipped before, a reaction you didn't question then. The story stays the same, but your understanding doesn't. That's what keeps you turning the page. There's hesitation here. You feel it in your chest before decisions, in the space between approach and action. It is not laziness, it is awareness arriving before certainty. You are paying attention now. And paying attention throws things down. It makes momentum less automatic. It forces you to sit with the question of whether you are choosing or just continuing. You tell yourself you will decide soon. After one more sign. After one more day of clarity. But part of you already knows the truth. Momentum doesn't need permission. Choice does. And choice asks something of you that momentum never will. It asks you to be present, to accept that there's no guarantee waiting on the other side. And still, there's longing underneath it all. Not far, for a different life. Just for one that feels more honest. One where your action don't trade behind your understanding. You don't want perfection. You want alignment. You want to feel like the direction you're moving matches the thought you're having in silent moments like this one. You're not lost, but you're not fully convinced either. You're standing in between, aware enough to question, not ready enough to leap. And that space feels uncomfortable because it doesn't come with instruction. It only comes with the recognition. And maybe that recognition is the point. Not to rush you forward, not to pull you back. Just to let you see yourself clearly. Standing there, mid-thought, mid-choice, realizing that something is shifting even if nothing has moved yet. You didn't call them mistakes at that time. They felt more like reasonable decision. Logical, defensible. You told yourself you were being practical. You chose what felt steady over what felt true. And it didn't look like a failure from the outside. It looked like maturity. It looked like keeping things together. Looking back, it's clear how often comfort won. Not because you were weak, but because comfort knew you better. It knew your patterns. It knew which fear to whisper into. So you stayed longer than you should have. You said yes when your body was already saying no. You followed paths that were familiar, even when they felt slightly off, because they didn't require you to explain yourself. At the time, those choices felt final, heavy, like doors closing. You remember thinking this was just how life worked. That clarity was something people talked about after the fact, not something you actually had while deciding. So you moved forward without it. You improvised. You hoped the feeling would catch up later. Some detours announced themselves immediately. Others took years to reveal their cost. There were stretches where you felt strangely numb, not unhappy, just muted. And if you would turn the volume down on yourself to make everything else easy to manage. You told yourself it was temporary, that you were learning patience, that this was part of becoming someone reliable. It wasn't until much later that the realization arrived silently, not in the moment of decision, but in the aftermath, in the way certain situations drained you faster than they should have, in the way you felt relief, not sadness, when some things finally ended. That's where it started to make sense. not as regret, but as information. You begin to see those years less as wrong turns and more as experiment you didn't know you were running. Each one taught you something specific, not abstract lessons, felt one. You learn how your body responds when you betray your own instincts. You learn how resentment builds slowly, disguised as responsibility. You learn how easy it is to confuse endurance with integrity. Pressure did its work silently, like wet clay. You were being shaped the whole time by expectations, by fear, by the need to be understood. You didn't notice the shape changing until you tried to move in a way that no longer fit. That resistance wasn't failure, it was feedback. Integrity wasn't something you understood earlier on. You thought it meant being consistent, predictable, easy to rely on. It took me steps to show up and to show you difference between being dependable and being aligned. You learned it in a moment where you said the right things and felt wrong afterwards, where everything looked fine on paper, but something in you kept pushing back. Those realizations didn't arrive with clarity. They arrived with the discomfort, with a subtle sense that something needed to change, even if you couldn't explain what yet. You didn't overhaul your life. You didn't make dramatic exit. You just started noticing, paying attention to the aftertaste of your decisions. And that attention changed things. Slowly, you begin to trust the silent signal more than the loud approvals. You started recognizing that peace wasn't about avoiding conflict, it was about reducing internal friction. The moment you once labeled as failures revealed themselves as reference point. Proof that you could survive misalignment. Proof that you could learn from it. You didn't grow because you planned it. You grew because experience pressed against you until something shifted. The force weren't dramatic. They were subtle collapse of certainty, and each one felt left behind a clear outline of who you were. You weren't willing to be anymore. Nothing here was wasted. Even the choices you would rather not repeat shaped your sense of direction. They didn't define you, but they informed you, and that information became something you could finally stand on, not as a rule to follow, but as a feeling you recognized when it appeared. When you zoom out, something softens. The story stops feeling like a personal flaw and starts looking like a shared pattern, a hesitation. The second guessing, the moment where we knew that what matters, but still take a longer route to go there. None of it is unusual, it's human, and more importantly, it is common. We are inconsistent not because we lack conviction, but because we are living inside competing needs. Safety and curiosity pull in opposite directions. One asks us to preserve what works, the other asks us to explore what might. We move back and forth between them, sometimes within the same day. That back and forth isn't failure to commit. It is evidence that we are paying attention. There's There is relief in realizing we are not alone in this, that the pauses we take aren't signs of weakness, but signals of processing. We avoid certain choices not because we are incapable, but because we sense their weight. At the same time, curiosity keeps tapping us on the shoulder, not loudly, just enough to remind us that there's more to notice, more to feel, more to understand about ourselves. Meaning doesn't arrive at all at once. It doesn't announce itself with certainty. It forms silently through connection. Often, in ordinary moments we almost overlook. In conviction, where we feel seen without explaining too much. In shared laughter that dissolves tension for a second longer than expected. In the simple recognition that someone else carries similar questions. Our lives aren't built from a single turning point. They are mosaic, small pieces placed over time. Some bright, some dull, some cracked on their own. They don't say much, but together they create something coherent. A pattern we can step back and recognize, even if we didn't plan it that way. No single moment defines us. Not the hesitation, not the wrong turn, not the delay. We repeat this because it is easy to forget when shame narrows our view. We are shaped by accumulations, not by isolated incidents. What matters isn't the moment we stumbled, but the way those moments begin to inform how we move now. Right now, in this present moment, there's nothing to fix. We are not behind. We are not catching up. We are standing exactly where the pieces make sense enough to be noticed. The pressure is when we stop treating our lives like a test and start seeing them as something unfolding. Unevenly, imperfectly, but honestly. There's safety in this perspective. Safety in knowing that growth doesn't require punishment. That understanding doesn't demand self-criticism. We can hone our experiences without ranking them. We can acknowledge our missteps without turning them into identities. We are here together in this recognition, not to arrive anywhere, but to breathe inside the truth that we are allowed to be unfinished. That the process itself is the connection, and that connection certainly is already doing more work than we realize. We start to notice something subtle about the way change happens. It isn't a flash of insight or dramatic announcement. It isn't the decision that feels urgent or loud. It is in the silent ones, the small changes that ripple outward without anyone noticing. The decision to speak honestly in a moment where it might have been easier to stay silent. The choice to step aside when pride wanted to step forward. Those aren't headlines moments, they are invincible threads, weaving through the fabric of who we are, slowly tightening the patterns. We begin to see that integrity is less about rules and more about feeling. It's not the bullet point on a list or a standard to meet. It is the sensation that rises in your chest when your action aligns with voice you have been carrying silently all along. Sometimes it is uncomfortable. Sometimes it feels like walking barefoot across uneven ground, but it is unmistakable. And over time, those small alignments are noticed by most, defined as far more than the obvious success or failure ever could. We notice the tension between love and fear underneath almost every decision. Fear asks for safety, for predictability, for a path with a few surprises as possible. Love, silent, patient love, asks for presence. It asks us to be honest with ourselves and others. It asks us to risk being uncomfortable in exchange for connection or reality. And more often than not, the decisions that feel small or ordinary are the ones where this tension lives. Choosing love over fear doesn't look heroic. It looks like showing up again, despite uncertainty, despite the pull of the easier option. We start seeing that everyday moment carries its appropriate meaning. Not the events that demand attention or accolades, but the ones that brush past. The glance that triggers a second too long. The phone call we almost didn't make. The email we edit and delete a dozen times. Each small decision doesn't announce itself, but together they map the territory of life. And often the territory is richer than any dramatic turn we imagine. It is in this way that purpose whispers rather than shouts. We have been looking for it in megaphones and fireworks, where it has been sitting silently in front of us all along. Purpose is present in the decision that feels too small to count. In the repetition of small acts that honor who we are, and who we want to be. In the gentle, consistent shaping of ourselves over time, we notice that listening closely to those whispers reveals more than chasing noise ever could. And the silent realization set us over us. Change isn't about trips, it's about accumulation, about choosing alignment again and again, about noticing that the threads we thought were random choices, hesitation, experiments have been weaving something coherent all along. It doesn't announce itself with fireworks. It doesn't demand applause. But step back and we see it. Step back and the subtle pattern of transformation emerges like the first hint of dawn of a landscape we thought we knew. We begin to understand that the life we thought needed a dramatic turning point is already being shaped in the soft space, in the silent moments, in the choices we didn't realize mattered. And in that observation, clarity arrives, not as a lesson, but as a truth we recognize because you have lived it. You have been noticing it all along, even if you didn't put words to it. That silent pull toward what feels right. The subtle recognition of when something aligns with who you are and when it doesn't. You feel it in your chest, in your shoulder, in a way your stomach tightens or ease. Not every day, not every moment, but often enough that it's impossible to miss if you actually pause. And yet, how easy it is to ignore that signal, to convince yourself that timing isn't right, that circumstances are inconvenient, that someone else's opinion carries more weight than your own instincts. There's a cost in that. It shows up as tension you can't shake, as stress that creeps in even during the moment that should feel peaceful. You recognize the pattern every time you suppress the nudge. Life is a little heavier, a little less clear, and eventually that heaviness whispers that something has been overlooked. There's a tension between hope and realism, that runs through you like an invisible current. You hope the next decision will bring clarity, yet realism reminds you that clarity rarely arrives fully formed. It shows up in fragments, in pieces you assemble slowly over time. You have felt the friction of this tension, haven't you? That sense that you are both moving forward and circling back at the same time. It is exhausting until you begin to recognize it as evidence, not failure, of the life you are navigating. You are standing at a familiar fork again, not the first time, not the last. The two paths are one, each carrying memories of previous choices. One is safety, predictable, and familiar. The other is uncertain and even silent in its invitation. You feel your body weigh each option differently this time, more attuned to be nuances you missed before. Your awareness is sharper now, even if fear still whispers in the corners. And this moment, you realize something simple. Your choices are more than reactions. They are statements, not loud, not performative, but real. Each decision you make, even the small ones that feel small or unremarkable, lights a line in the story of who you are. That's the part of we rarely notice. That identity isn't declared in grand gestures. It is whispered into being through repeated alignment, through the accumulation of small acts that reflect understanding of yourself. You feel it now. That silent resolve, that subtle recognition that you are already practicing this, whether you name it or not. Each hesitation, each nudge, each soft instances of your intuition has been guiding you. You don't need proof beyond what you already sense. The signal has been present all along, silently marking the path that matches your own internal compass. And in acknowledging it, you realize you are not starting from scratch. You are simply stepping with awareness into the moment you have already created. Each choice is not just an action, it is a declaration, a continuation of who you are becoming. And right now, in this space, that awareness feels like a silent sort of power. You won't hear it in a roar or see it in a sudden shift. What comes next will arrive silently, almost slowly, not as pressure, not as obligation, but as possibility. The future isn't waiting for you to catch up. It is already beginning in the smallest movement. The decision that seems insignificant now but will ripple further than you notice. The choice to respond honestly in a message you almost ignored. The moment you pause before speaking, listening to the hesitation inside. The small act of following through on what feels aligned, even when the outcome is uncertain. Each one seems minor, almost invisible. Yet together, they shape the terrain of tomorrow. They ripple outward silently, leaving traces you can't fully measure. Courage isn't dramatic. It is approach worthy. It doesn't arrive with fireworks or certificates. It lives in silent corners of your day. In the decision to show up when the easiest option is to walk away. In the willingness to feel that what face and act anyway. What you feel and act anyway. In the subtle instances that your actions reflect what you recognize in yourself, not what matters, what others expect you to perform. What matters isn't movement for the sake of moving. It is listening closer, listening to the soft undercurrent of your awareness instead of trying to make everything louder than it needs to be. Like tuning in to a conversation between your instincts and your reasoning, letting the dialogue unfold before you act. That's where change begins, not in dramatic leaps, but in silent attentiveness. Imagine yourself a year from now, looking back. The small moment you honored, the tiny acknowledgement of what matters to you, will have woven a pattern far more meaningful than any bold attempt to get it right. You won't remember minor missteps. You remember that you paid attention. You remember that you acted when the whispers felt louder than the noise. And so the question returns silently, as it did in the beginning. Have you noticed the room you have been standing it all along? Not the walls, not the furniture, not the echoes, but the space itself. The pause between what was and what hasn't arrived yet. That space is not empty. It has always been there, carrying possibility, carrying attention, carrying the subtle momentum of what you're already doing. And now, it waits for you to continue noticing. If it felt familiar, that's not surprising. You have been here before in different forms. In the hesitation, in the silent doubt, in the moment where the next step seemed invisible until we noticed it. You recognize the patterns because they have been moving alongside you, shaping the space you occupy without demanding attention. We don't need to label it. We don't need to measure it. There's a rhythm to noticing, to questioning, to moving slowly with awareness. The curiosity that lingers is louder than any fears that whispers. It doesn't rush, it doesn't demand. It simply exists like sunlight filtering into a room that has been closed too long. You might feel the traces of twists in your chest, a sense that some thread have been quivering silently, threading together. Moment you barely registered at the time. That tension between hope and realism, between comfort and alignment, it hasn't gone anywhere. And that's okay. That tension is the room you have been inhabiting all along. It is neither good nor bad. It simply is. And in noticing it, we notice each other too. The shared pattern, the familiar silence, the weight that has always been present, but never alone. There's a relief in that. There's safety. There's a sense that we are permitted to stand here, unfinished, uncertain, still turning pages we have read before. Nothing concludes neatly. Nothing is resolved. Not entirely. The silent curiosity remains. The gentle pull toward what matters, toward what aligns, continues, and maybe it's enough. Maybe that's the point. If it felt familiar, you already know what matters. You already know it together. And still, the room waits, open and silent, for what comes next.